Thank you, dear. Well, we are super excited to have these groups, and part of it's because we are actively doing the mission of God. But we're kind of always doing that. This is just a kind of greater, more corporate way that we can pull this stuff off. So what is the mission of God? We've been talking about this on Sunday nights too, because it seems appropriate. I think it would be super sweet to ask Jesus, because people have written entire libraries on the Missio Dei, which is the mission of God. There's a lot of theology behind it and a lot of talk behind it. But really, what I want to know is, what was Jesus' mission? Because, these guys are here on a missions trip, but there is no missions trip like leaving the throne room of God and coming in someone's womb. That's a missions trip, you know what I'm saying? So that's not something I've ever experienced and ever will. Jesus came all the way here for what reason? He tells us in Luke 19:10, to seek and save those who are lost. So that is why Jesus came, to seek and save those who are lost. That is the mission of God. Have you ever been lost? Apparently Ashley's been lost quite a lot. I am, as you guys know, one of 5. And I guess it was hard to keep up with us sometimes, because one time my oldest sister was left at a funeral home. I'm not kidding. It was daytime, and it was only for like an hour, but apparently we were driving somewhere, and each parent thought she was in the other one's car, and she was like locked up, like the person left, like locked the doors, turned off the lights, and it was like an hour before my parents were able to figure it out and then get to her. And she tells, I was too young to remember, but she tells a story like she was terrified, like what is going to happen to me? And the relief that she felt at being found was huge. But interestingly, I think the greater relief was on the part of my parents, because there's an even greater sense of joy and relief in finding someone than in being found somehow. This is one of my favorite movies, August Rush. Have you ever seen August Rush? Yeah. So it's like a fairy tale, sort of. It could never really be real. But this little boy who's kind of lost his parents, or they've lost him or something, and for like 10 or 11 years, he just holds out hope that they're going to find him. And so at one point, he is talking to a friend, and he says, what do you want to be in the world more than anything else? And he's, of course, thinking fame, money. He's got this enormous talent. And out of everything in the world that he would want to be, he says, found. And that's the thing. When we're lost and we know we're lost, the greatest feeling in the world is to be found. Now, if we're lost and we don't know we're lost, we could fill in that blank with a lot, right, of other stuff that we want. But when we're really lost, we want to be found. And that's what we're talking about tonight in the mission of God, being found. And the best story, the best way that Jesus illustrates this, I think, is through a particular parable in Luke 15. So we're going to look at that parable tonight. Now, it's most often called the parable of the prodigal son. Have you ever heard that? The prodigal son. In the translation I was reading, I think it was NLT that I was reading this in at first, it's called the parable of the lost son. But actually, both of those are wrong, because this parable is actually about 2 sons. And both sons are extremely lost. So we're going to look at the parable and see how both of these sons who are lost could possibly, by the end, be found. And hopefully learn some stuff. Now, first to set it up, who is Jesus telling this story to? You have to go all the way back to the beginning of Luke 14 to see it says, he was sitting at the home of a leader of the Pharisees. The Pharisees are the religious people. The really smart ones, the scholars, the ones that do everything right and maintain their holiness, their set-apartness. He was at one of their homes having a banquet, and he starts to look around, and he's like, y'all all look alike. Like he literally looks around and is like, you guys need to invite some people not like you to these feasts. I mean, read it. This is what he says. And this is the thing with eating. This is why when Jesus said in Luke 19:10, I've come to seek and save the lost, it was in response to his relationship with Zacchaeus, who was a tax collector. He was eating with him. Now, we don't understand this in our culture, because for us it's like, let's all go to Smashburger, and it's no big deal, right? Like, nobody cares if you eat with someone else. But in that day, when you sat down to eat with someone, you were showing, it was a symbol that you were in covenant with them, which is a big deal when the purest, holiest rabbi is in covenant with sinners, right? So they're like, why are you eating with these people? And that's when he tells them, because this is my mission on earth. So he looks around and he says, you guys are keep inviting people to your parties who look just like you. You ought to go out and find some crippled people and some lame people and some sinners. And one of the guys, I think it was like getting warm in there or something, with Jesus rebuking them like 2 feet from them. And he's like, the great feast, that'll be great. I mean, he just totally changes the subject. And he says, let me tell you a story about the great feast at the end of time. And he tells a story about the master of the banquet inviting in all the respectable people. And they were all too busy to come. Now, feasts didn't happen very often. They were very rare. So it's not like this was like, we'll get another chance next Friday. Like this was a big deal. And everybody who was really respectable could not make it a priority to come. And so finally, he just got frustrated. He started inviting in people off the streets, drunkards and prostitutes and all sorts of sinners. And he says at the end of all this, for none of those I invited first will get even the smallest taste of my banquet. Now, who are the people he invited first? Think about where he's sitting and who he's talking to. The Pharisees are the ones who decided not to come to the banquet, right? So everything that he says from this point on, Jesus doesn't sit around and go, I don't know, I've got some stories. I don't know, Matt, which story should I tell? I guess I'll tell that one. Like, he is very pointed and very intentional about how he teaches through stories. He is teaching these particular stories because those dudes need to hear it. So then he goes on to the cost of discipleship, one of my favorite themes. And then he tells these awesome parables about the lost sheep and the lost coin. And finally he moves on to the lost son, the 2 lost sons. So we're going to pick up in Luke 15. So after he said all this, right, to illustrate the point further, Jesus told them this story. A man had 2 sons. The younger son told his father, I want my share of your estate now before you die. So his father agreed to divide his wealth between his sons. Now let's stop there for a second. You don't get your inheritance until your father's dead, okay? So this is a big deal. The son goes to him and says, I know there's safety and security here. Like, people don't do what we do now. Now we can just go, we've got a joint bank account. You know what I'm saying? Like, I can pick up and go to New Zealand and still share money with someone else. That's not how this worked back then. You worked your whole life for your family's estate, knowing that one day you would inherit it. So you worked hard knowing a portion of it would be yours. You didn't have your own stuff, okay? He didn't get his own stuff. He shared it with the family. And he says, I will go be with strangers before I will be with you. I will go to a place where no one knows me, and I have no hope of anything except, no protection, no love. I would rather do that than stay here with you. To me, you're dead. Just give me my stuff. Because I am kind of interested in your stuff. So he says, could I have that money, and then I'll go do whatever I want with it? And crazy, the father says yes. Now, when he divides up his stuff, the word for his wealth is actually the word for life, his living. He, again, didn't go to First Bank and pull a bunch of money out of the bank. He went and sold tons of properties to make this happen. It took a lot of pain, a lot of cost, and it was extremely public. Everybody would know, why is that guy selling off his land? Oh, you didn't hear about his son? Just completely disgraced him. I don't know what's going on in that family. Completely disgraced. So the son would have known, I am burning bridges there, but whatever, and walked away. And the father took great, great pains to do this. And this is painful for us to watch, so think about how it must have grieved the father to see his son walk away like that. A few days later, this younger son packed all his belongings and moved to a distant land. And there he wasted all his money in wild living. About the time his money ran out, a great famine swept over the land, double whammy, and he began to starve. He persuaded a local farmer to hire him, and the man sent him into his fields to feed the pigs. The young man became so hungry that even the pods he was feeding the pigs looked good to him, but no one gave him anything. When he finally came to his senses, he said to himself, at home even the hired servants have food enough to spare, and here I am dying of hunger. I'll go home to my father and say, Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, and I am no longer worthy of being called your son. Please take me on as a hired servant. So sin looks really awesome from afar, right? And apparently while we have money. But as soon as we need somebody to pull us out of a ditch at 3 a.m. and all of our friends say, oh, you don't have any money anymore? Oh, sorry, it turns out I have something else going on. And I can't really step in and help. I will never forget this young woman we met a few years after moving here. She knew everybody. She worked in a highly public, she was an evangelist sort of person, just like knew everybody. And everybody was her friend. And then she got pregnant. And she couldn't drink anymore. She couldn't smoke pot anymore. And guess where all her friends went? She called us after knowing us for 2 months, maybe. I don't even know that I'd met her in person yet. And said, hey, I know this is a lot to ask. She lived down the street from us. Would you mind getting me some crackers and Sprite from the store? Like, none of my friends will answer their phones. Friends are not really friends if they're like that, right? And people tend to go away. And then the idea that he was going to be a hired worker, again, this is the type of thing that doesn't really stand out to us. You had the family who were the heirs, and then you had the servants who lived on the property. And even though they worked, the servants kind of worked, and we think of them as the lowliest, they weren't actually the lowliest, really. The lowliest people were the hired workers who didn't get to live on the property. They would come, they would work, make a wage, and go back home. And the reason is, even though to us it's like, wow, you got to live on someone else's land, that was actually a bonus. Ever seen Downton Abbey? It's so not real, because no lord is going to sit in a prison. Anyway, but it is the closest thing that I can show to say, you kind of were favored. You had this loyalty. They really did have this loyalty going with the family that they served when they lived on their property. They wanted them to be happy, and vice versa to some degree. As a hired servant, he didn't get anything. He just got wages and he went home. And here's why. The rabbis taught that if you disgraced your family to this degree, if you broke the rules of the community this badly, you couldn't just say you were sorry. You had to make restitution. And so he's already planning how he can pay back his father. He'll never let me live with him again. He might let me work for him, and eventually at some point maybe I could earn my way back. Now, at least he knows the father is kind of good, because he wouldn't even try this if he knew he was just a normal person. Because by this point, any other father would have ditched him, called him off for dead, said good riddance, and never let him near again. But he must have seen the kindness of his father enough to know he may not ever consider me his son again, but he might let me work for him, and maybe one day I can earn back his favor. That's the first lesson that we have about being found. It requires coming to our senses. It took him a while to get there, right? He didn't come to his senses when he was having fun. He came to his senses when all the money ran out and nobody was around anymore. Now, I'd like to look at that and say, awesome. Look at you, big dude. You should have done it when, but that's not the point. The point is, even at that degree, when he had spent everything that he had, he was still willing to maybe try. You notice that he goes home, right? He has to do something. He can't just sit in the pigsty. His father's not going to find him there. He has to take some sort of action, come to his senses. Have you ever tried to talk to someone, or have you ever been that person who's far from God and they don't care? And they're not going to listen to you because sin still has some sort of gleam of pleasure in their eyes right now. Now, after the 15th guy ditches you after having sex with them for no good reason, then they start to figure it out. After you find yourself blacked out for the 6th time and realize, my friends left me here and anything could have happened to me, then you start to, right? All of a sudden, sin doesn't have that kind of same thing to it anymore. We have to take some sort of action and come to our senses. If we don't know that we're lost, we're never going to be able to be found. Let's move on. So he returned home to his father, and while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming. Filled with love and compassion, he ran to his son, embraced him, and kissed him. His son said to him, "Father, I've sinned against both heaven and you, and I'm no longer worthy to be called your son." But his father said to the servants, "Quick, bring the finest robe in the house and put it on him. Get a ring for his finger and sandals for his feet, and kill the calf we have been fattening. We must celebrate with a feast, for this son of mine was dead and has now returned to life. He was lost, but now he is found." So the party began. Now, when I'm hanging around in my house, I might hear if a car rolls up, but unless I'm standing at the window watching, I'm not going to see somebody coming from far off. And that tells me the father was watching. He was not only there like, oh, I'm going to make this boy pay. You know what I'm saying? Like, maybe I'll let him come home, but he is going to be the black sheep forever. We are going to tell stories about him till the day he dies. If he wants to come and kind of grovel, maybe he can get back. I mean, that's the best case scenario. The father is like watching. Like, I don't know exactly what it looked like, his house, and I mean, it's the Middle East, so I'm not exactly sure where he was standing to watch, but from afar off, he saw him, And he runs to him. Now, do you understand how ridiculous this would have sounded to the first hearers of this parable? He is an old, dignified man. They don't run. They got to pick up their robes and show their legs like a little boy to run. They don't do that. This man threw off every bit of his dignity to run to his son and welcome him in, wrap his arms around him, not give him a chance to tell him his plan to make restitution, and just say, finally. I mean, this is what we call extravagant love, right? We sung about it before. You're unrelenting with passion and mercy, unstoppable love that never ends. Those are the words we just sang. This is that God. This is that Father who runs out, wraps his arm around us, and then, guess what? Doesn't just say, you can come home, fine. We'll figure out a place for you. He puts the best robe in the house on him. You know, that would have been his robe. It's not like they have a bunch of robes sitting around, you know what I'm saying? Like there's not a closet full of robes that are nice. It's his robe. It's the Father's robe to show everybody that he was back in the family. And then he puts his ring on him to show them that not only is this boy accepted as sort of like, whatever, we'll deal with him, as his son. An heir, okay? So the boy has already taken a third of this man's wealth because the oldest son got 2 portions, right? Because they had to run the show, so they got more of a portion. He's taken a third of this man's wealth and squandered it. It is gone. It will never come back again. That's how money works. When we spend it, it doesn't come back again. He has spent it on horrible things, which is kind of a spitting in the face of this father who's worked so hard for all of it. And now he's telling him, not only am I going to forgive you, I'm going to restore you to sonship. I mean, this is ridiculous. The people who are sitting and listening to this would have thought, what? You will not find a man like that in the world. Obviously, the Father is a type of our Father, right? Where he says, I am just so happy that you're home, that you can have it all over again. Have the inheritance one day. Have everything. Have everything. You've always had everything to be here with me. I'm just so glad you're here. Like the stuff doesn't matter to him. It matters to us. It doesn't matter to God. Tim Keller, he wrote a book called The Prodigal God. It's really good. He says this, by putting his own robe on the son, he was saying, I'm not going to wait until you've paid off your debt. I'm not going to wait until you've duly groveled. You are not going to earn your way back into the family. I am going to simply take you back. I will cover your nakedness, poverty, and rags with the robes of my office and honor. So the second thing that we learn about this is the Father is the real prodigal. Now here's why it probably doesn't make sense yet. Because we think prodigal means someone who wanders away. A wayward soul, wasteful, right? That's not what it means. Prodigal means recklessly spendthrift. Do you know what that means? Reckless. Reckless in how you spend. That makes sense why we call it the prodigal son, right? He spent all his father's money. But the father is the one who really gives up the most. I mean, here's the thing. It's his money that the kid spent anyway. It's not like the son is giving away anything that's his. He's giving away his father's stuff. And then the father is the one who pays the price to bring him back in the family. Because here's the thing. Forgiveness always has a cost. Just not to those of us who receive it. But to the one who gives it, it's heavy. Right? Somebody is going to... If my son breaks something of yours and you say... which is likely, and you say, that's okay, no big deal. It still costs you something, right? You might forgive him and it costs him nothing, but it costs you the price of that thing. You got to go back and buy the same thing again, right? There's always a cost of forgiveness. It's just not to us who are forgiven. 2 Corinthians 5:18 says, but all things are of God who reconciled us to himself through Christ and gave unto us the ministry of reconciliation. To wit, that God was in Christ, reconciling the world unto himself, not reckoning unto them their trespasses. That's what it means to not reckon something, to not give somebody something they deserve. That's prodigal. So he's actually the prodigal God. He is the one who gives extravagantly. He is the one who was reckless with how he spent love. That's how he pursues us. The younger son had already known there was food to spare, he says, in the father's house. He says, I know there's extra food there. But now he also knows there's grace to spare. There's extra forgiveness, extra mercy, extra everything. But guess who didn't like this? Meanwhile, the older son was in the fields working. When he returned home, he heard music and dancing in the house, and he asked one of the servants what was going on. "Your brother is back," he was told, "and your father has killed a fattened calf. We are celebrating because of his safe return." The older brother was angry and wouldn't go in. His father came out and begged him, but he replied, "All these years I've slaved for you and never once refused to do a single thing you told me to. And in all that time, you never gave me even one young goat for a feast with my friends. Yet when this son of yours comes back after squandering your money on prostitutes, you celebrate by killing the fattened calf." His father said to him, "Look, dear son, you've always stayed by me, and everything I have is yours. We had to celebrate this happy day, for your brother was dead and has come back to life. He was lost, but now he's found." Here's the thing, when we think we're better than someone else, we can't forgive them. We can't give them grace. The younger son had disgraced and hurt his father up and down, but so did the older son. I mean, he stands outside the door like a whiny baby and won't go into the party. Now, what he's doing in that, and you got to understand, every little thing people did in that culture showed respect or disrespect. It's not so in ours, right? We're Americans, we're direct. We have to say it out loud or it doesn't count, you know? But in these guys, every little nuance would show disrespect if they weren't going out of their way. So to stand outside the party that his father is giving and refuse to go in is saying, "I don't agree. I think he's off his rocker, and I'm not going to participate because he doesn't know what he's doing." How demeaning in that culture it would have been for the father, who's the host of the party, to have to come outside and ask his son to come in. And the son is more than happy to make him do that because now he wants him to pay. And then look at how he addresses him. The best way to translate it is, "Look, you." Now I got to tell you, my dad's from India, and it's not like it used to be, but you don't say, "Look, you," to a person in that culture, especially not your father. I mean, he's going out of his way to insult him because he disagrees, because you know what? It's his money too. I mean, when the father gave the son his inheritance again, guess who's not getting as much? They split it. That's the way it works. You're telling me I'm literally coming in from working. This guy's having a party again after all of his business, running around doing stuff. I've slaved for you. And you've never done anything. Now, to kill a fattened calf was a big deal. They didn't have meat every day. They only threw a party very, very rarely. And the calf that they're fattening up, and you're going to use it on him? You never use it on me. Here's the third thing we learn about this. This story is about two different ways to live that do not lead to God. Self-discovery. Have you known anybody in Summit County who's on a journey of self-discovery? I'm just going to go off by myself. None of these people know what they're talking about. My family's stupid. My hometown's stupid. Nobody knows what they're doing. I'm going to go off to the mountains and figure it out all by myself. And somehow, by spending a bunch of money and drinking my brains out and giving myself cirrhosis of the liver, I'm going to somehow figure out enlightenment. I mean, I don't know. I kind of think we got a lot of younger brothers around. That's okay. Jesus loves us, no matter what we are. But I think we got a few running away from something and thinking self-discovery is going to lead us to something. This story shows us it doesn't. But the other way is moral conformity. That's the older brother. That doesn't lead us there either. Because both of them were using the father to get what they wanted. They wanted his things, and somehow or another, they were going to control him. And the younger brother did it by pitching a fit. I want my stuff. And the older brother did it by being really, really good. But you know what? We can't get there either of those ways. We can't get there by being bad, and we can't get there by being good. And here's a crazy thing. The younger brother, he ends up okay in the end, right? Because he humbled himself. He took a big risk, and he went home. What about the older brother? We don't know. Why don't we know? Because the older brother is literally the people Jesus is talking to. He is telling the story to the Pharisees, and he doesn't know how it's going to end. And we don't really know what they chose. Did they choose to humble themselves? Did they choose to remind themselves, hey, I'm not any better than my brother? I don't know. Doesn't tell us. That's why he leaves us hanging at the end, because the people he's talking to, the older brothers, are sitting right in front of him, and they get to make the decision, because they don't like that Zacchaeus likes him. They don't like that sinners and prostitutes are able to enter his sphere of relationship. They don't like any of that. Those are younger brothers. We've worked our whole lives. We've been slaving away for God. We have earned it. And Jesus is like, you can't earn anything. That's the thing. How do we get to him? It's so simple. Just by relationship. That's all the Father wanted with them. It's what we call covenant, right? When we try to do things or not do things to get to him, we're going the wrong way around. We're either going to stomp our little feet and pitch a fit in the end because we didn't get our just desserts, or we're going to stomp our feet and pitch a fit because we want to go do what we want to do. And the Father's sitting there. He's the prize. The prize is not his stuff. The prize is him. And all they had to do was spend time with him. All they had to do was be with him. I want to show you a little video. It's just an interesting little take on this. The story of the parable of the prodigal son, social media style. And then we'll come up after. Go and play that. don't know if you can relate more with the older son or the younger son, but most of us have gone one way or the other at some point. Here's the thing about the older son. You know, Jesus told this parable of the lost sheep, and he said the shepherd went out and found them. And then he told this parable of the lost coin, and he said the woman went and found it. And then he tells the story of the son, and they're waiting to see, because this is how stories work, this is how parables work. They're waiting to see who would go and find him. And you know who was supposed to go find the younger brother? The older brother. That was his job. But he was so angry and had so much judgment because he thought he was so good that he didn't get up from his place, aside from the anger he felt when the father finally forgave him. If we are part of the family, we get to go do likewise. The great thing is we have an older brother who went out of his way, right? Did that whole missions trip thing, ended up in a womb, grew up, died, horrible, horrific death, was rejected, was spat upon, is still rejected. I mean, it's not just as he was on the cross. Still today, he has done everything, and still the majority of the world says, no thanks. He took all of that for us. That's the kind of older brother we have, who came and found us. I want you to just go ahead and bow your head, close your eyes, because I just want to give an opportunity. Maybe you're here tonight and you say, I've never really heard about God like that. I had a conversation with someone a week ago, and they said, we talked for 2 minutes, and they said, what's your church about? And I just talked about God. I said, I've never heard anything like that. We had a young woman come here for a few months. She's moved away now, but she said, I grew up Catholic. I never heard about love. Is that in the that story about that son, is that actually in the Bible? Because nobody ever told me that the father was like that. And I'm not saying anything about the Catholic Church. It's just the background that she was from. I'm telling you tonight that God is love. That he will reach into the worst, ugliest, nastiest parts of the world to grab us and pull us out. We have to come to our senses. We have to want him. And then we have to allow him to shower love on us. Because the only way to get to him is through relationship. The only way to have him is by receiving him. The only way to do it is by covenant. And we can't do anything or not do anything to make that happen. We just enter being a child of God. Because once that son was his child, he was never going to stop being his child. But once he was his child, he was going to start acting like it. So I just want to ask tonight, nobody's looking around but me. Everybody else, just close your eyes, bow your head. I want to ask tonight, if there's anybody here, you say, I don't really know what that looks like. It's frightening to me, because at least I know the world. I know the rules to all that other thing. I don't really know the rules to any of this. I was just going to ask you, if you haven't made that decision before, just let it go and understand the best thing in the world for you is to be found by a really good father. If you want to do that tonight, if you want to make a choice to follow him and love him and let him love you, could you just lift up your face and make eye contact with me so that I know who you are? Now in a moment, this is the first Sunday night of the month, so we always have prayer, a little time of extended prayer, because usually we don't have that. Tonight we're going to do it a little differently. I'm going to go ahead and have the leaders that I talked to before stand and go to just different parts of the room, and we're going to be there to pray for you. And here's the thing. If anything struck a chord with you tonight, and you think, I think I'm the older brother. I think I've been kind of judgy. Or I think somehow I've put too much stock, maybe a little too much stock, in the good things that I've done. Maybe somewhere along the way I started to think I earned something or God owes me something. And especially when I see people who have wandered away really far get the same thing I get, it's really irritating. I'm going to invite you in just a moment to stand and go to one of these people and say, will you just pray for me that legalism, that law stuff will just be broken, that I can really just love him and be gracious to others the same way the Father's been gracious to me. You might be that younger brother, or maybe you've been there. Maybe you feel a special calling toward folks like that. I mean, we obviously do. We wouldn't be here, honestly. You might feel like, I want to go find them. I want to be a good older brother. I want to be somebody that goes out of my way to go find people who are lost. And I just want somebody to pray with me, to kind of get courage, maybe find some boldness. I mean, those students who are here, they're going to be doing that all week in various ways. But the rest of us, we're here all the time. We've got people around us all the time. We've got coworkers. We've got people around. And so if that is hitting home with you and you say, I just want to pray that God will help me as I go out on mission. Because the whole point of this whole story that Jesus taught was he came on mission to us and we go on mission to others. Otherwise, we might just go to heaven, right? So I'm just going to pray. I'm going to invite you guys to pray. You can go ahead and turn on that music and maybe just turn the lights down. If you're here and you want to go, you can go, but we're going to probably just pray for about 10 minutes or so, however long you guys want, and then we'll hang out, we'll have coffee, and we'll do all that stuff that we normally do. But I just want you guys to feel free to sit at your seats or to go for prayer or whatever. If you want to, we have a lot of people around to pray for you. And anything that you need, if you need healing for something, if you want to be filled with the Spirit, anything that you want tonight, go to someone that you know has faith and have them pray for you, that God would do something. Lord, I just thank you. I thank you. Father, you're so good. You don't have to do any of this. You don't have to pick up your robe and come running out to us. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to be gracious to the older brother and kind. You don't have to do any of that. You don't shame us, though. You don't bring shame. You just help us know who we are. And we're children. Thank you for receiving us. All the things that we do that aren't right, all the things we don't do that are right, none of that really matters to you. What matters to you is that we are close to you, that we are home. Thank you